everyone. I am Kelly. This is Two Broads Talking Politics. And the other broad with me today is LaDoris Cordell, who has a new book that has just come out recently called Her Honor, My Life on the Bench, What Works, What's Broken, and How to Change It. So welcome, LaDoris.
Thank you so much, Kelly. I'm delighted to be talking with you.
Yeah. So this was a great read. I will admit that most of what I know about what happens in a courtroom is from TV and
Law and Order
novels, Law and Order, lots of mystery novels. So it was super interesting to get this sort of inside look at what happens in a courtroom and what happens from the perspective of a judge. So let me start with just what made you decide to write a book about your experience as a judge? How did this book come to be?
Oh, thank you for asking me. It's very personal. The book came to be, believe me, I'd never thought about writing a book about my experience, having been a state trial court judge here in California for nearly 20 years. So let me just backtrack to how that happened. The last 8 years that I was on the bench, every Friday afternoon, I wrote a letter to my parents. My parents, I grew up just outside of Philadelphia, in a suburb of Philadelphia. And I would write about everything that happened that week. So that means all the cases I presided over, the decisions I made, and how I felt. And my parents loved getting the letters. They were my greatest supporters. And I say were because they're no longer with us. And in fact, I dedicated the book to their memory. So the 8 years, every Friday, and then I retire. I go back east to visit them. And my mother, who was a very organized person, she pulls out a box from the closet. And she said, "What do you want me to do with these?" I'm like, "What?" She had saved every letter. So just so your listeners know, I'm not talking emails, right? I'm talking letters. And I think letter writing is so important. And these were the letters. She saved them all. I had made no copies because this was for them. So I boxed them up, sent them back here to California. And I think it took me, Kelly, about maybe 3 years before I decided to read them. And I was just stunned by what I read, because it brought home to me how many cases I had presided over. And many of them I had not remembered, of course, until reading the letters. So that's kind of the origin where it started my thinking that maybe these letters might be fodder for a book. I mean, this book is not a book of letters. That's not what it is, but it certainly enabled me to remember many of the cases that I write about in the book. So that's the personal side. Then there is the other part, which I wrote this book really for 3 reasons: to educate people about the legal system, to entertain, because this is not some dry textbook. I hope you will agree with that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. There are things in there that may make you laugh, make you shudder, make you cry, because that's the life of a trial court judge. And then the third reason is to energize people. I want to energize every single reader. I want to energize judges, current and retired, to do what they can to fix what I believe to be a broken legal system. And in fact, there's a chapter in the book called The Fix, and maybe we'll talk about it later, where I list 10 things that I think need to be fixed and ways that we can go about fixing them.
Yeah. And so one of the things is the thing that before I got to the fix, I was already thinking, this is terrible. This idea that you really have no training, that you sort of go in and, this is not the kind of job that doesn't have consequences. This is a job that has real consequences for the decisions that you're making every day. And yet you have, it sounds like maybe it's slightly better now, but still not great. That there's no real training on how to do this, on how to make these decisions. So can you talk about that piece of it and what it's like
shocking.
To just,
isn't it stunning? So, and you compare it to, say the medical profession, you're not going to have someone operate on your brain unless that person is a specialty in that area, has done a residency, has been supervised, right? That's not what judging is. So let me just backtrack. Trial court judges are the people's court. It's the first line in our legal system that people meet when they come into court. And trial court judges, as I write in the book, preside over everything that really impacts people's lives: evictions, whether or not there's a conservatorship, adoptions, criminal cases, civil cases, probate, where people are fighting over wills, mental health cases, and that is where people want to get out of locked psychiatric units. Who decides that? Judges. So the training. Very little, if any. So picture this. You're a lawyer. You've practiced law for 10 years and your specialty is contracts, transactions. So you don't even go into court much at all. And you decide, I've had enough. I have enough years in. I want to be a judge. So you either run for a judgeship or apply to get appointed and you get your judgeship. Now, remember, you've hardly ever been in a courtroom. And guess what? You have to say your first assignment. It's family court and you decide who gets custody of the kids, or it's the mental health calendar where you decide who gets out of locked psychiatric units and like, what? Excuse me. So today there are judges' colleges, but generally they work if you've been a judge for a year or so, then you can go to the college to learn more stuff. Or the newest appointments, for example, in California, they go to the judges' college for, and sometimes it's either a week or 2 weeks, and they get a kind of a taste of the different kinds of things because I taught at the judges' college, but that's it. So, and as you noted in the book, there are real consequences when people in Black robes have such power over people's lives.
Yeah. That just sort of blew my mind thinking about that. And it's not just, obviously you get experience the longer you're there and you're sort of learning on the job. But then, as you mentioned, you're looking at all these different kinds of cases. So maybe you start to get sort of the nuances of family law, but then you're going into psychiatric cases or, something like that. So can you talk about that too, that sort of huge range of different kinds of things that you work on?
Sure. So most trial judges, and I won't say most, some specialize. So on our court, there was a judge who became nationally famous because his specialty was juvenile law. That's all he did. That's it. So, but there are judges like me, and I think most judges do this, who get rotated in and out of assignments. So you might spend 2 years, generally it's like in California, maybe 2 years in an assignment, then you go on to something else. And as you could read in the book, I was all over the place, right? Adoptions, mental health, criminal cases, the whole bit. So I wanted to do it because I wanted to learn all aspects of the law. But as you so correctly just noted, it's on the job training. It's on the job training to really kind of grasp it. And I write about that, for example, in probate court, when I presided over people fighting over dead people's stuff, how I didn't know the probate code, which has 800 pages in it. And I just had to really rely on probate lawyers to kind of guide me through it and try to not look like a fraud until I could get a grasp.
Yeah. And you also said something earlier about running for office. And so this is, I live in Chicago. And so the very first thing I noticed when I started voting in Chicago was there would just be pages and pages of judges that I was expected to vote on, knowing essentially nothing about them. I'm a pretty conscientious voter. And so now I do my homework and I look at what all the different legal groups are saying about the judges and stuff, but it's a lot to go through. So let's talk about this idea that people are voting, often knowing very little about what they're voting on, for judges and retention of judges, and what it means as a judge to have to run for office.
So I can talk about this with some credibility because I was initially appointed to the bench by Jerry Brown in the early 1980s, when we had 2 levels of trial court judges in California. They were consolidated in the mid-1990s. So there's just one trial court. It's a superior court. But for me, at the time when I was on municipal court, there was a superior court, and I wanted to be on that trial court. And so to get there, I ran and I was elected. So you might think, wow, I got elected. I must really like judicial elections. And I am opposed to the election of judges. And as you mentioned, which most people don't get, the retention elections of judges. Retention basically applies usually to appellate judges, the ones who review the decisions that trial court judges make. And the question for voters is, should the person be retained for another term, right? So why am I opposed to judicial elections? Because they have become all about the money. Judicial elections are funded by special interest groups, and they funnel money into candidates and to sitting judges who want to be retained and pay them money. And they expect, of course, to get something back. And that is a huge problem. And, when people think, well, maybe, these elections are just a few $1,000s. No, these elections are in the $1 million range. million and more that judges raise money to get elected or to be retained. And so here's the problem. The problem is it's okay if you're a politician. I mean, I don't like the whole money in even political side, but it's what we have right now. So politicians make promises to people. They say, vote for me, give me money, and I'm going to do this, this, and this for you. Judges are not politicians. They are not. Judges must never say, elect me and I'm going to rule in favor of big business all the time, or I'm going to always take a certain view on these kinds of cases. No. The reason that's a problem, the judiciary is the third leg of our democracy. We have the executive branch, legislative, and the judiciary. When the judiciary is no longer independent, then there is a real threat to our democracy. And that is the concern I have. We now have a major threat to our democracy because of these special moneyed interests that are infiltrating the appointment of and the election of judges.
So what is the solution? What would be better?
Well, in the fix, I write that I believe that there should be independent nominating commissions. And basically, these would be commissions comprised of, folks like you, Kelly, you're not a lawyer, right? But you have an interest in all of this. So retired judges, maybe retired lawyers, but a mix of people that this commission would then vet people who want to be judges or the judges who want to stay and be retained. They also vet them. And what does vetting mean? It means, so they reach out to jurors who have sat in the judges' courtrooms. They reach out to lawyers, to litigants who've appeared in front of these judges who want to be retained. And this whole process should be transparent, should be live streamed, and people should see very clearly what the process is. And for those who have never been judges, who are lawyers who want to be judges, I believe not only should they be vetted, but they should have to audition. They should have to preside over maybe some small claims cases where it's like Judge Judy cases where no lawyers, and be observed and be critiqued as part of getting into, if they want to get into the judiciary. Then the commissions vet these people, and maybe there are 4 or 5 candidates for a seat. Those recommendations go then to the governor, because the governors eventually appoint. And I don't think there should be elections, should be appointments. And the governor should then choose from the people who have been vetted and approved by the commission. So California has something like this. We still have elections, but when there cannot be an election, we have it. But the governor doesn't have to abide by the commission's recommendations. My view and what I write in the book is that should never happen. The governor should be left to choose from those who have been vetted in a very public and transparent way.
I like it.
Well, it's done in some states, so it's not a brand new thing.
Yeah. What would you recommend if people, you said you wanted to educate and energize in this book. If people are interested in these kinds of reforms, what are things that the public, people like me who are not judges, are not lawyers, what can we do to try to advance these ideas?
Well, the first thing is to read my book, because it really educates and gives you a foundation about, what to even look at. And then I'll tell you the next step. Go, if you have time, sit in a courtroom and just observe what goes on in a courtroom and what judges do. Some people are like, oh, I don't want to do that. These courtrooms are paid for by us, by taxpayers. They're ours. The judge's salary is paid for by us, by taxpayers. They work for us. So I say to people, don't be afraid. These are your courtrooms. Go in and watch. There are some kinds of cases that are closed to the public. For example, juvenile cases where juveniles are charged with crimes. Everybody can't just sit in. So that's step number 2. And then once you have read Her Honor, you will get some ideas, particularly when you look at the fix about, that's interesting. So for example, the appendix is not in the book. So in the very front of the book, people can use the QR, there's a scan or there's a link. And in the appendix, I have listed every single state, alphabetical order, and the District of Columbia for how much jurors get paid in every state. Now, a lot of people don't think about it, but is it okay if I just talk a little bit about jurors very quickly?
Sure, yes.
Thanks. So the jury system, for me, it's what keeps our legal system legitimate. I believe in juries. Sometimes do juries get things wrong, in my view? Yeah. But in the main, I really believe them. I presided over lots of jury trials. And when jurors have finished, generally, they just loved it. They loved getting a sense of what goes on in a courtroom. So it's an important civic duty. But guess what? When people get their notices in the mail, I get phone calls. How do I get out of jury duty? It's like it's the plague, right? It's like it's, and I'm like, oh, this is so sad because it's such an important civic responsibility. But why do people want to avoid it? Because you're sitting sometimes all day and the next day, sitting in the jury room, waiting. You don't know what's going on in the courtroom. And judges don't even explain once you're pulled in why they've had to sit and wait around for hours. And then there's this other part. And some people disagree with me. I think jurors should be compensated. And some people say, no. It's a civic duty. You should do it, because your heart is there. And I'm saying, no, people are taking time from their lives and from their jobs. So what I have in the appendix is a listing of how much jurors get compensated in every single state. And it's really stunning because it's all over the map. So California, wealthy California, big budget. Jurors get $15 a day and not counting the first day, right? There are some states that pay $0. The federal courts, if you're a federal juror, you get paid $50 a day. I think all of that is not significant enough to let jurors know that they matter. And to show that we really value jurors, I have an idea in the fix about big companies, Microsoft, Facebook, Google. When their employees have to go to jury duty, they should be required to pay their employees full salary the total time they're away. That's not a requirement. And these companies use the courts all the time. Yeah. I think they should be required. But what about these small companies? You have just 2 or 3 employees. They can't do that. So I propose that there be a state juror compensation fund with sufficient money to pay individuals the salary they're not getting because they're doing jury duty. And also, if you're unemployed, if you're a retiree, that you get at least a minimum wage that the state pays. And the reason I want this is that we need as much representational diversity in our juries as possible. And I will tell you, I've provided over lots of jury trials where I didn't see Black or brown people. Those folks, they couldn't take off from work. And there were concerns. So everyone has a right to a jury of their peers. And for me, that means representational diversity in our jurors.
Everyone has a right to a jury by their peers, but you note that juvenile trials don't have juries.
And so that's something. I have a chapter about juveniles charged with crimes who are tried in juvenile court. And the whole idea behind juvenile courts was, it's less punishment. Adult courts that's a whole lot of punishment going on in adult courts. And it's more rehabilitation and the belief that these are young people and they can be redeemed. And we've really been getting away from that. But since Black Lives Matter, the murder of George Floyd, there's really been a focus on trying to get back to redemption when we deal with juveniles. And I'm not talking about just being soft and, a juvenile's committed a serious crime. That's not what I'm talking about. But the primary motivation should not be, in my view, the punishment, but the redemption. But to get back to your point, juveniles in juvenile court, and let's just take California, which is typical of most states, do not have a right to jury trials. The problem for me is this. An 18-year-old is an adult. An 18-year-old commits, say, a robbery. That 18-year-old gets tried in adult court. He or she's an adult, and they have a right under the 6th Amendment to the United States Constitution to a jury trial. Take a 17-year-old or 16-year-old commits identical crime, identical background as the 18-year-old. That juvenile does not have a right to a jury trial. Instead, they are tried by a judge sitting alone. And this comes from the U.S. Supreme Court, who has basically said, this is the way it should be. It's fine. I take issue with that. And there are some states that give juveniles that are charged with serious crimes, charged with felonies, an option to have a jury trial, and some even require it. So my view is that the U.S. Supreme Court needs to back off of that decision. They need to rethink it. And I believe that, at least with regard to felonies, if a prosecutor is going to charge a child with a crime which will be on that child's record, then I believe that that juvenile has a right, should have the option to have a jury trial.
Yeah. So I hear this term activist judge a lot. So did you consider yourself an activist judge? What does that mean? Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? What is that?
So the answer is yes. You said good or bad? Yes. Because there are people who look at they say, oh, she's an active or he's an activist judge. And they put the bad label on it. It's a bad thing because the idea theirs is, oh, this is a judge who's gone rogue and is not abiding by judicial precedent, cases, the law, and is just kind of throwing it to the wind and doing whatever the judge wants. So that's one version of the activist judge. And no, that's not good. And we don't want judges who do that. Am I an activist judge? Oh, absolutely. Because my view is an activist judge is a judge who abides by the law, abides by precedent, but does everything in her power to make that legal system the best it can be. And in fact, I write in the book, judges should be activists, and those who are not are just people in black robes who are do-nothings. So think about the numbers. There are about 27,000 state trial court judges in the U.S., and you figure we're closing in on 400 million people in this country. That's just a handful. So these are really precious positions. I mean, not everybody gets to have one of these positions. And my view is that if these are so hard to get, these positions, we judges should be using our time to always figuring out how to make the system better and then trying to do it. We're uniquely positioned in the legal system to do it. But that doesn't mean the system is going to welcome changes that judges are trying to put forward. And I write in the book how systems generally resist change, right? The education system, businesses, the legal system. It's like, just leave it alone. Leave it the way it is and everything will be fine. And my view is no. If you know there are things that need to be fixed, it's time to do that. But it isn't often easy. And I write about that in the book where I tried in some instances and I got a lot of pushback.
So let's talk then about, you've mentioned a couple times the fix, and we've talked about some of them. Why did you decide that this was the way to end the book? And, what are you hoping happens with this chapter?
So I was writing the book and I was about finished. And it was my editor who said, no, you're not done. You need to write about what you think can be done, because you've written about all of these cases, about the training of judges, and said there are issues here. So I need a chapter that talks about this. And I thought, she was so good. And I said, you're right. So I sat down and thought about everything that I'd written and everything that I'd experienced and came up with ideas that don't just apply to people in the law. No, this is for everyone to kind of think about. And in my view, if you want to change things, you get overwhelmed if you look at all the problems in the world. So my thing is start with the micro, start in your own community, start in your own county and look at what's happening there. That's the get educated part. And then get energized to say, well, there's some things here that I think need to change. And the judge in her book, has even suggested some of these. And that's what I want. I want people to get excited about being able to make the kinds of changes that can help make the system better. I don't want people to think, Kelly, that I think, oh, the legal system's all bad. No, I don't want people to think that. In fact, here's the good part. The good part is that our legal system is based on the finest and best principles you could ever come up with. Due process, the right against self-incrimination, the right to a jury trial, the presumption of innocence. These principles were formulated by white men who were propertied, who did not contemplate women, poor white males, or people of color to ever have those principles applied to them. So the problem we have these principles is in the implementation. So we have got to make sure that these principles are implemented and applied to all of us, women, people of color, poor people, fairly and justly. And we know that that has not happened. If you look at the U.S. Supreme Court, the worst decision the court ever made was 1857 Dred Scott. And they said all these principles, they don't apply to Black people. No. And in fact, you have no right, no standing in federal court. Then you move along a few years later, you get 1896, U.S. Supreme Court, Plessy versus Ferguson. What do they say? Separate but equal is just fine. No. But the reason I'm committed my profession, my life, and my professional career to the law is that I do believe in it, because I get to 1954 Brown versus Board of Education. I get to in the 70s to Roe v. Wade. And I think, yes, the law in a way is kind of schizophrenic. It's like the bad and the good. And now here we are pushing back against Roe v. Wade. And I make no secret, I'm a feminist, I'm a liberal, I'm gay. I put, all that's there in the book. And my concern is that we need to make sure that people want to be involved in a legal system and believe that it can be made better because it can.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I love that. So I could probably keep asking you questions all night, but I want people to just go buy your books. So tell people how they can buy the book.
Well, the book is available on Amazon, and some people don't want to go on Amazon. They don't support it. That's okay. I get it. At Barnes & Noble, at independent bookstores. And all you have to do is, one way is just go on my website, www.judgecordell.com, and click the author button, and then you can see where the book is sold. And Kelly, I just can't emphasize enough that if people read this book, it's an eye-opener. It's just an eye-opener, as you said. I mean, there's things in there like, what? I didn't get it. But once you get it, I think then you're more able to figure out what you want to do to make the system better. So I leave you with this. If we're kind of wrapping up here, it's like my mantra. And I got it from Alice Walker, the author and activist. And it's this: activism is my rent for living on this planet. So what I say to people, and you're already doing it, Kelly, with your podcast, pay your rent. Spend every breath you take and every waking hour paying your rent. So I say that to you all, and I hope that you will enjoy Her Honor and then pay your rent in any way you think you can to make this world a better place.
Excellent. I will put links up so people can find the book. I noticed that you read your own audiobook, which I love. I'm a huge fan of audiobooks. So people should check that out as well.
Wow.
So yes. Terrific. Was there anything else you wanted to make sure we talk about?
I think that's about it. Your questions were wonderful, and I hope that people are curious enough now to read the book, because no judge has ever written as personally or written anything like this. And so I want people to understand what it is we folks in the black robes do and be informed, so you'll know when it's time to look in your county and your area in which you live. Get to know who these people are. Go visit your courtrooms and understand they are your courts.
Excellent. Well, thank you for joining me, and thank you for writing the book.
All right. And thank you for paying your rent.
Thank you for listening to Two Broads Talking Politics, part of the Dimcast Podcast Network. Our theme song is called Are You Listening? Off of the album Elephant Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and was created for use by this podcast. You can contact us at twobroadstalkingpolitics@gmail.com or on Twitter or Facebook at Two Broads Talk. You can find all of our episodes at twobroadstalkingpolitics.com or anywhere podcasts are found.